Hello YouTube, it's Lion here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we are doing another manga review. Today we are reviewing Junji Ito's Uzumaki. Now, this is written by Junji Ito. It's published by Viz Media, as you guys can see right there. Again, I don't think this is a signature or anything like that. I think this is just a Junji Ito collection, whatever that entails. The demographic here, as far as I understand it, is seinen. And the genres here are, again, horror, supernatural. And this one doesn't really have a sci-fi aspect like Gyo did. So it's just horror and supernatural. I don't know that this has an adaptation. I'm not actually sure. I didn't really have time to look it up before recording this video. But I would say it probably does because it makes sense that it would. But I don't know if it's a movie or an anime or something else, right? And the premise here is basically that we follow this group of people that live in this small village at the edge of Japan. It's a coastal town called Kuroizucho. And we follow specifically a young man and a young girl as they deal with this curse of the spiral that has befallen their town. And it's pretty interesting, actually. I definitely think that so far, I've read like this, Gyo, and half of Tomie, and I think that Uzumaki is definitely his best work. Still though, I don't think that Junji Ito is the best storyteller, but he is quite a good artist, and he does have a good grasp about what is creepy and what kind of bothers people. So he's pretty good as a horror mangaka. In terms of plotline here, there's really not too much to it. So it's set up in a way that it's kind of like vignettes, and each vignette is kind of connected to the one before it and the one afterwards. And they kind of are episodic. They kind of deal with a specific curse or kind of situation, maybe an occurrence of the curse, right? We start with Sichi, I think is his name, and Kira, I think is the girl's name, or Kiara, something like that. Kiri Goshima and Suichi Saito. And we deal with Saito's family dying because of this curse of the spiral, which takes like 2 or 3 different stories. And then we kind of switch focus over to Kiri Goshima, and we get to see how her family is affected by this curse, and then how the whole town is affected by this curse. And it progressively gets worse, but it is constantly like pretty bad. Now, the plot line itself isn't like super clear. Like there isn't a beginning point and an end point that is kind of well established as a normal story. This is more like this broad sense of time passing forwards from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, and the end of the story having some amount of resolution, even if it's not like a positive resolution. But there really isn't any clear like lesson to be learned or journey of discovery. So this isn't like a traditional like story, right? This is more just about exploring a creepy situation, which I think is pretty cool. I don't really find it to be bad. This is by far probably the best written story that Junji Ito has done of the 3 that I've read. But it's not super complex by any means. So there's that, I guess. I don't know how to segue into a next topic or kind of make it better than that. I also feel like I'm super kind of boring today compared to the fact that this is the Junji Ito book that I've enjoyed the most, which is kind of odd, but it is quite good. I actually did really like it. I thought it was pretty creepy. I really enjoyed the artwork. Like the plotline not being the best isn't really a problem because this isn't necessarily about having a good plotline. This is just about moving events forward in order to create the situations that Junji Ito wanted to create. That's not necessarily the best way to plot a story, but it's not necessarily a bad way to do so if you're focusing on specific aspects that you want to tell, right? So Um, Generally, I found that this was a good story. It was interesting and creepy, and I wouldn't really say enjoyable, but like it was pretty darn good. The characters here are kind of interesting, but they really don't have the same complexity that the characters in Gyo did. Not that the characters in Gyo are particularly complex, but they do feel a little bit more complex than these. In this case, it's basically just two young characters, a male and a female, which I already mentioned, Suichi Saito and Kiri Goshima, and the kind of struggles that they go through as they deal with this curse on their hometown. The thing is that, like, they clearly know something's wrong early on, and they decide to not leave, which is understandable because in order for the plot to happen, they have to stay. But logically, they could have easily left before the curse really took hold. And so it's kind of like these characters are just stupid. Granted, most of the time in horror films and horror stories, the characters do have to be some level of incompetent. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. But I don't know. Saito was kind of interesting in the sense that he was immensely depressed and he had this kind of interesting relationship with death. At least interesting from the outside. But he wasn't really explored that well. And I feel that that's kind of a loss on Junji Ito's part. I don't really find that Saito was used in any way to convey any meaningful thematic elements. He was kind of like the crazy guy that was right, but that no one listened to. Like the tinfoil hat guy, which is kind of a waste of a very interesting character. Kiri, on the other hand, is kind of like the normal person that has enough strength of character to deal with all the problems around her, that kind of eventually just kind of gets overwhelmed. There really isn't anything too interesting about her, but she was kind of like the character that ended up being around all of the issues that happened. So she's kind of like the character through which we see the occurrences, but that kind of causes her to be less meaningful as an individual. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think that these characters were that great. They definitely existed for longer than the characters in Gyo, so there's like a bit more substance to them, but the characters in Gyo were a bit more interesting. They kind of developed their thematic meaning a little bit more, so I found them a little bit more interesting, but I don't know. It's kind of difficult to kind of compare these characters and these stories to each other. In terms of world building, I think that this kind of excelled at that because it took such a simple concept, the spiral, right, the Uzumaki, and turned it into something that has a lot of implications and meaning to it, right? And it kind of created this insane amount of scary supernatural occurrences around this kind of just very simple circular pattern. So I think that Junji Ito really popped off with this. I think that his way of using a spiral, something so simple but so kind of enthralling, I guess, was kind of really brilliant on his part and kind of allowed for this kind of crazy amount of situations to occur. So I really liked it. I think my favorite instances were the stuff with the spiral being an art form. And so a few different characters went kind of crazy trying to make spiral patterns. And this kind of side story that occurred with these spiral galaxies. I thought that was really, really interesting. One, I like space. Two, I just thought that was very interesting because it kind of makes sense, right? Everything in space is moving in some sort of circular pattern. So having a story that focuses on circular patterns and spirals deal with space is actually quite good, right? And it kind of allows for this supernatural aspect to have a little bit more weight to it because it's like, oh, well, it could be aliens, right? So it's kind of interesting. It's pretty meaningful. I also really like the end of the story, the kind of crazy stuff that happened at the end was very, very interesting. It kind of really was a nice ending to the story, but it was the difficulty about getting to that end that was sometimes not my favorite time. I generally did like this, and I read this pretty fast, but it's significantly heftier than Gyo, and there's a lot more reading, and sometimes the reading was just kind of like for the sake of reading. Sometimes it didn't really feel like it was building up to anything. Sometimes it felt like it was like, how do I word this? Kind of just there to fill the pages. But generally, it was actually pretty well done. The world building was pretty nicely and well articulated. So I liked it. In terms of art, Junji continues to be a master of his artwork. He's not by any means the best in terms of like what's it called, the ability of drawing the human figure, because he does have this kind of weird vibe to how he draws, but it doesn't matter, because when he kind of pops off and goes really grotesque, he is amazing. It's very, very interesting. If you like creepy artwork, you'll probably really enjoy this aspect of Junji Ito. There's a color page, I guess. I really like this image. I think it's very, very good. I think there's one in the back as well. Yeah, this one is super creepy. It kind of references some of the early stories, and it's pretty messed up. But yeah, I don't know. The artwork was pretty good, pretty amazing, very creepy. I liked it a lot. It's more or less the same I said it with Gyo. I think that, yeah, the art here is better than the Gyo. There wasn't any fan service in the story. It didn't really fit into the kind of vibe that the story is going for. Although it might have been able to, I don't really necessarily think so, but I mean, you could figure out some way to tie, some sort of fan service into this kind of idea of spirals and this horror of like being trapped in this unending swirl, right? But generally, no fan service, so you can read this if you don't like fan service, but I mean, there's kind of a lot worse things in this book, so I don't know. In terms of rating, though, this is a 4 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed it more than Gyo, and this one might be one that I would consider buying full price. I don't necessarily know that I would really want to, because it does cost $28, probably $30 now, but I'm not really sure. It is good though, and I actually do want to reread it, and I would probably enjoy rereading it relatively soon. So, pretty good job here. The story was a lot more interesting than the one in Gyo, or at least was a lot less, confusing, or maybe confusing isn't the right word, but rather a lot less convoluted than the one in Gyo, and so I thought it was more interesting to follow. Or maybe not more interesting, but rather easier to follow. But it did suffer a little bit with the characters there, so kind of depends on each person. Again, this isn't something that scared me, and in fact, this will probably scare me less than Gyo, or creep me out less than Gyo, because this one didn't really have any kind of things that I'm particularly worried about attached to it, like Gyo did with the thing with the unknown of the ocean and spiders and creepy crawlies. Since this didn't really have any of that, I was less creeped out by it, but it was still kind of like, chill inducing, so pretty good job there with that. But yeah, I definitely recommend this title if you like horror, if you like Junji Ito or Kazuo Umezo. Definitely check this out, obviously. And in terms of similar titles, again, other Junji Ito works, and of course, other Kazuo Umezo works, which is the guy that did Drifting Classroom, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought, and thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.